For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Okay, looks like we are live tonight. It is late night on SFT, so good to see everybody. It looks like we got some good people in the chat. Brother Matt, we got Luca, this boy Draws, Sister Joe, Doki Doki, David, P to the Rays, and Taz, lots more Doki Dokis already shooting me the super stickers. So that's awesome. Good to see everybody. I hope everybody's having a good day. We just had a really busy week and a half. Definitely some must-watch interviews. Check out. We've interviewed, obviously, Dr. Rob Carter, Dr. Charles Jackson. We had Dr. Rob Stadler on to debunk good old Professor Dave. We don't expect a response video to that one. I think Professor Dave, quote unquote, is tapping out. Last night was a great debate. We went for almost 2 hours. Kent Hovind versus Derek Barnes. Definitely check that one out. Getting some good feedback. I had a blast moderating that one. That was a lot of fun. But the fun is not over, not even close. We are in the midst of confirming a couple more awesome interviews with creation scientists such as Dr. Carter and Dr. Jackson, Dr. Stadler, of course. So we've got a lot to look forward to. Interviews, debates, discussions. So good to see everybody. This is going to be also another interactive night, interactive stream. I've got some notes regarding some arguments that I've heard. I've also got a couple videos we'll play and some comments that we'll cover. Some evolutionist comments they love. They love their evolutionist storyboards. I hope you guys appreciate the thumbnail for tonight. So we are going to cover quite a bit. As we have with, if you haven't yet seen we did a two-parter on the low confidence science nature of the fossil record, the hominid fossil record in particular. So definitely check those out. The comments, I'm looking at my notes thinking, where should we start? So many evolutionists, so little time, so many evolutionist comments, so little time. So what we'll do is I'm going to share screen and we will go over a couple things here. Let's see. Okay, so we will be touching this one right here, Godless Engineer and good old SpeedOfSound, one of our favorite critics. He's got a lot of work. I should have him on just to give him some advice how to run a stream. He's been saying that he's gonna, debunk Matt and myself, our videos. He's pretty well admitting that they're going untouched for the most part. We're putting out lots of videos. We want to put out lots of content for you guys. And he attempted a response to Dr. Charles Jackson's interview the other day that we did. His stream was, I think he might have covered 12 minutes of it. I'm not sure. Didn't touch any of the arguments. Really didn't put forth any type of rebuttal. My advice when it comes to lengthy videos, I don't always expect the atheist to watch the whole video while they're live and respond. What I like to do, for example, Gutsy Gibbons' last video was over 3 hours. So what I did was I took out a couple of the highlights, played those clips, addressed those arguments, but I watched the video and I wrote a lot of notes. Every couple minutes, I'd list her argument, write some notes, and then I make sure that I cover it all. So somebody like Speed puts out a video apparently responding to the Dr. Jackson interview, and he gets through, 10 or 12 minutes of it. So that's not much of a response. But this one right here is going to be Godless Engineer and John Maddox think they've addressed mitochondrial DNA and molecular clocks. So we are going to be touching that one. We'll save that for a bit, though. That's going to be kind of the grand finale. So I've put out, like I said, some videos on the hominid fossil record. Since I'm sharing screen, can't really see the comment section. So why don't I check from my phone, make sure everybody's good. Everybody can see everything going on. Good to see everybody. Okay, awesome. Luca says, I did actually watch all videos on both sides. Luca, we appreciate that. We appreciate that. And we find you to be one of the more objective atheists. David, good debate with Smokey. That was good. You guys were respectful. Didn't even need a moderator. So, yeah, good to see everybody. And let's get this going. So here's a comment in response to one of the videos that I did regarding the hominid fossil record, how there's significant overlap in coexistence. So right here, I put out some information the following day because there's just so much information overturning human evolution. And remember, a lot of times it comes down to the inferences, the conclusions, okay? Those aren't foolproof, of course. The evolutionists like to treat them like they are, like they are as foolproof as the actual empirical data. So right here, I pointed out to a good article. I said, I've read many more articles today that amazingly corroborate everything I was saying in last night's must-watch stream debunking the hominid fossil record. I put a quote here from one of the articles. It's well established that modern humans mingled with Neanderthals and Denisovans. DNA convincingly shows the three lineages interbred in every combo. Modern human / Neanderthal, modern human / Denisovan, and Neanderthal / Denisovan. And if anthropologists' interpretations are correct, we also shared the planet with Homo floresiensis, Homo naledi, Homo luzonensis, as well as perhaps some late surviving Homo erectus. And I go over here, we also know the Homo genus coexisted with the Australopithecines, right? The ape types, which is exactly what we'd expect given the biblical model. We'd expect overlap, coexistence, of course, that we've shared the planet with these various ape types, including the Australopithecines that they say are our ancestors, and that Australopithecus Afarensis, they'll say, is in our direct line. So I pointed out human evolution is one big, giant coexistence, perfectly and overwhelmingly consistent with the post-flood, post-Babel world. Now, the evolutionists want to come back with a storyboard. Early Erectus coexisted with, say, Australopithecus Afarensis. Maybe if they'll even admit to that. I'm not sure if someone like Gutsy Gibbon would, but I showed a clip. I've provided much data corroborating the fact that Australopithecus afarensis is a chimeric species. Lee Berger agreed with this. A mixture of human and ape bones like the Australopithecines. So clearly they're the homogeneous. I would say Erectus coexisted with Afarensis if their bones are intermingled and mixed together. So, but they'll say it was early Erectus that coexisted with the Australopithecines, and late Erectus would have coexisted with the other human variants like Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, Naledi, for example, Floresiensis, before Erectus ultimately went extinct. But I'm going to cover that in more detail actually in a minute. We're going to get through this. So I don't want to bore the audience with this. You can go read this. Oh yeah, right here. So our good old critic, Ian Chen, he typically, nice guy, doesn't really typically have much to offer. I can't imagine how many times I provided him with some data and never did get a response to it, which is okay. And he even had the guts to, well, I can't remember what video it was, but he was knocking creationist predictions that, none of them come true. And what's funny is he made that comment in one of our streams recently, debunking Vice Rhino. And I called him out. He was in the live chat, and I must have spent 15, 20 minutes going over the numbers of predictions coming from the uniparentally inherited DNA, like the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA, in regards to genetic signatures and stamps found in those DNA compartments, and pointed him to Dr. Jensen's active research program, the papers he's recently put out on the Y chromosome. A lot of that just might have went over his head. And those predictions are quite technical. And it's understandable. They're not always easy to even explain, but they are working well. And I predict someone like Ian Chen probably hasn't read through those papers or even watched through Dr. Jensen's series on. I also pointed to the cold slabs prediction. I mean, we've had prediction after prediction. We've got novel predictions on DNA function. that are in print. DNA function when it comes to nested hierarchical patterns in these highly conserved mitochondrial DNA proteins. So there's no excuse. If these critics want to critique, they should be up to date on the information. So I pointed out Ian Chen. So he left a comment. And his comment was exactly what I predicted would be the response. So Ian Chen seems to think late erectus and early erectus can save him from the observations. Ian obviously cannot look at the data without his presuppositions and evolutionary-based assumptions clouding his judgment. Every new finding that contradicts ape-to-man evolution will come complete with an evolutionary storyboard. Unfortunately for Ian, the storyboards are not actually science. So here was a funny comment here. So I'm just going to show you, when you actually put in the effort to debunk these guys, they don't typically come back with anything of substance. Let's see here. So he puts forth his argument. Okay, here. So I point out, did you watch my recent videos showing Lee Berger himself confirming Afarensis is a mix of Homo and Australopith bones? And it's a chimera species. This means the Homo genus has been around even since Afarensis. This is the observation. We observe massive overlap and coexistence. Now, the question is, what model does this data fit better? And I say it is clear. It fits much better with the Babel model. So he says, out of Babel, the bones that you're trying to use to prove your point are from Africa. And I'm going to cover this a bit more too after you guys see the context and the comments. He says, no, honestly, I didn't watch your video. Typical. What I have watched is way too rambly and unfocused for my liking. When you release a paper, you can send it on to me and I'll read it. So lately what I've been doing, and it seems like some evolutionists are appreciating, is I've been putting out smaller clips. But even the smaller clips must be too much for good old Zach here. So I point out, he says, oh, out of Babel. I say, yeah, that's right. It's not an argument, and I'll show you why later. Just a misunderstanding of the model. He says, the bones that you're trying to use to prove your point are from Africa. Why wouldn't they be? No, honestly, I didn't watch your video, he says. I say I address the majority of my critics' arguments in my videos. You guys can read this. Let's see here. Oh, he says, when you release a paper, you can send it on to me and I'll read that, right? Your typical evolutionist response when they're cornered, when are you going to get your Nobel Prize? Like these silly arguments. And I point out that this is a red herring. When the evolutionist knows they have lost the debate, what's next? Where's my Nobel Prize? How many times have you heard that? My arguments come from technical papers, articles. Because remember, these arguments and this data is coming from, like these quotes I have are coming from the secular articles and papers. But the evolutionists have a different interpretation of the conclusion, but they think that the conclusion is empirical. Okay, oftentimes it's the best inference. And I'm going to show you that there's no more clarity when it comes to human evolution. It's 2020, no more clarity. He says the problem isn't whether it's a mosaic, it's the difference in what you say a mosaic is versus what it actually is. And you can read that comment for yourselves. Now, here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. And I'm not sure if Erika will finally come out and admit it, but the fact is numerous paleoanthropologists in the field actually agree that Afarensis is not a valid taxon. It's a jumble of bones from multiple species. So they constantly, you'll see, especially in Erika's videos, that they almost scoff at the concept of artificial species when this really is a thing. And one argument specifically Erika points to is sexual dimorphism. Okay, well, in fact, Johansson has reported at one time that at least 2 different species from 2 different genera were represented in his bones. Some fossils even looking exactly like human fossils. Well, maybe that's because they are human. Now, here's the thing. Due to the existence of differences. So there's a big range of differences, okay, seen in the bones attributed to the Australopithecines. When I say Afarensis, that's Lucy, okay? Sexual dimorphism was actually invoked, which is simply, what this means is physical differences in males and females of the same species, okay? Now, they claim that the larger human-looking bones belong to larger male Australopithecines, while the smaller ape-looking bones belong to females that lived in the trees. But this isn't at all 100% agreed upon. It's not a claim that there's a majority consensus. Many in the field have expressed disagreement with this sexual dimorphism hypothesis. that it's erroneous for many reasons. And the original assessment that Afarensis is a jumble of mixed bones, including human and ape bones, is actually more accurate. But to put it simple, so what it is there's two types of people in this field. Arboreals, now they like to emphasize the bones that have been called Lucy's kind, for example, that look very apish, okay? While others will emphasize more of, say, the fragmented or the isolated bones, where they can do more storyboard. Those ones that look human, and say, see, this isolated bone right here, it's more human-like. And then they'll try and say Lucy walked upright like modern humans, when in fact, this is all better explained by the chimeric nature of Afarensis. Christopher Rube actually points out, he pointed out in the new documentary that came out, Dismantled. Great movie, highly recommend it. I actually just watched it today. So it just came out. But he points out that we've never seen a case of sexual dimorphism where the male locomotes so much differently than the females. Okay, so there's just problem after problem. But here's the point. Here's the point. They misunderstand the model. When you actually go to, I want to go to the paper, and I want to point out a few things. I'm going to show you Gutsy Gibbons' video, because we're going to show you where simple worldview differences result in totally different conclusions and interpretations. So you can read this comment. She just doesn't really give an argument, just says, so I just watched this, the 2 low confidence videos, the raw map video, the debunking Gutsy Gibbon videos, literally around 6 hours of content. Hopefully she listened to that at 2 times speed. She says she's going to have to break it down, comments on our knowledge base, whatever. So I point out, and this is exactly what we're going to get. Okay, I guarantee you. We're still waiting for a genetics response. And apparently we're going to get that soon. So, because remember, the genetic data is the direct line of evidence that can help us determine what's true. Independent origins or universal common ancestry. But these bones, these fossils, we can make interpretations and conclusions based on them, but they are low confidence science. They're indirect lines of evidence. So therefore, we've got competing explanations. The Out of Babel, the Out of Africa, for example, human evolution versus descending from Adam and Eve. How are we going to resolve this? Well, when we look to the genetic data, the direct lines of evidence, that's what's inherited, sperm and egg, genes, traits, genetics, not a bone found in the dirt, not geography, not a rock. So this is what's going to help us win the war. And that's what's so funny as to why they're struggling so hard on the genetic data. Go look at our playlist. We got about 33 videos. 1 or 2 have maybe been responded to, and then we responded to those, and there hasn't been any responses since. So I point out here, for the record, I understand your position on the coexistence, okay? Because they like to play it off like we don't understand their position. No, we do, but it doesn't fit. I know you would say early Erectus coexisted with some of the Australopithecine types, while late Erectus coexisted with the human variants. I think our biggest issue here is going to be matters of what? Interpretation, inference, assumptions, biases, and worldviews. Okay? And this is a fact. Before I go into this video, though, I want to pull up a slide here for you guys to see, because we're going to go over some of these issues with the comments, okay? And then we're going to go through that paper. And, okay, good to see everybody in the chat. Everybody's having fun. Creationist says, saw Dismantled yesterday. Great and inspiring documentary. Yeah, great movie, brother. Doki Doki. Dismantled is out. I want to see that one. Yeah, it was a world premiere, I believe. So you get like a couple days to watch it. And I was lucky enough to watch it. Okay, so let's see here. Before we get into too much, let's go to... Okay, so you know what? Here's a good one. So here, I find this funny because an argument that Erika will use is she'll claim that, you know, we will know if these, because this baboon bone, for example, was accidentally attributed to Afarensis for 40 years. So Gutsy Gibbon will say, you know, if you find this piece of bone and this piece of bone, although they're fragments and they're found in different locations, sometimes miles away, if they fit nicely, then they belong to the same species. Okay. Well, here's what's funny. I'm going to just destroy that right here. Okay. See the arrow there? Let's see. See the arrow right here? Okay. Well, that baboon bone, okay, was reconstructed just as is shown in this picture, and revealed in museums just like this, like it was part of Lucy, okay? Because apparently, as you can see, it fits so perfectly, right? It connected, okay? So the fact is, erroneous bones can be connected, since a lot of these bones connect imperfectly anyways. The more morphologically similar, and anatomically, of course, a species is to another species, the easier it will be to mix the bones during reconstruction. What's more similar anyways, a chimpanzee and a human, or say a human and a baboon, or an Australopithecine and a baboon? I mean, clearly here for 40 years, this was reconstructed. It has been attributed to Lucy. It's right there, looks like it fits nicely, and this is oftentimes the case. And many paleo experts agree that Afarensis is a chimeric species. So humans, being most similar anatomically, morphologically, in physiology and genetics, clearly our bones then and ape bones would be the most apt to be mixed and mixed together as single species, for example. Now, obviously, it's going to be a different case with animal creatures that we are less similar in anatomy and morphology. But as you can see here, it is possible. So artificial species are a thing. It's a real thing. As you can see here, too, based on the coexistence. You got Ardipithecus ramidus here, Australopithecus anamensis, Australopithecus afarensis, Africanus, okay, Homo erectus all the way up here. You'll notice I went in my other video, notice this, common ancestor of Homo sapiens and chimpanzee way back here, about 6 million years ago, split. Look at this. And I showed this in my video, what was it, last video, you guys might remember. Look at the chimpanzee line all the way down here. No fossils. That's because everybody wants to get famous and they want to find the big missing link when it comes to the human line, right? So that just goes to show. And even Bernard Wood in that book, he admits that there is a bit of a bias to find that which is in the human line versus that which is in. And the thing is, there has been 100% bones found when it comes to the ancestors of chimpanzees. But guess what? They've been misattributed to all these other species because if you'll remember from before, I mean, you can see you got all these different Australopithecines, okay? But we have more variation oftentimes in the same species than between species. So when you're looking at fossils, any little morphological difference, any little morphological variation, look what they did with the dinosaur species. The same species in different stages of its life, okay? And what they did was they labeled them different species when it was the same species. It would be like finding human fossils of a baby, a child, a teenager, an adult, and an old person, and claiming they're all different species. You know, this has happened. The fossil record is low quality, low confidence science. So this is what they'll do with the Australopithecines. You know, a couple of different ape types, like the Australopithecines, that they'll look at a certain morphological variation and give it a new name, right? Make it look like they've got more than they have. And it just goes to show you that it's funny. Oh, where's all the chimpanzee fossils? Now, if you look, you got Erectus up here, okay? But you've got Afarensis down here, which is Lucy, okay? And you've got all of these coexisting. You've got Erectus all the way up here, but we know that Afarensis, there's evidence. I showed the Christopher Root lecture too, where he goes over all the numbers of lines of evidence suggesting Erectus, Homo sapiens coexisted with Afarensis all the way down here. Here's the thing. Erika, in her video, she said, you know, wolves and domestic dogs can live at the same time. Domestic dogs came from the wolf, but the domestic dogs cannot live before the wolf. We cannot live before our great-great-great-grandfather. So, and as you can see, it's a bushy mess. There's no more clarity. But here's a quote from a paper that I typically show. The collection suggests that Homo and Australopithecus coexisted as early as 3 million years ago. Okay, here, I want to show you. Good to see you, Shadow Dancer. Yeah, we're going to be having her on for a history lesson that we're really pumped for. Actually, this slide here is from the Dismantled documentary. Phenomenal documentary. So here we go. Did we come out of Africa? So I want to address those comments. I want to show why it's a foolish position to take, foolish arguments. And since there's been a lot of videos we've put out recently on this issue, and I imagine Gutsy Gibbon would be on the same side of this argument, but I wouldn't want to put words in her mouth, so we'll see. But this is typically the huge response. Let's go over the Out of Africa real quick, okay? Let's go over just the basics for a bit. I want to make sure that we can see this. So I do want to get to the Godless Engineer and SpeedOfSound as well. Okay, so to go over it briefly, it was a huge surprise. Okay, no one's going to deny this. It was a huge surprise to the evolutionary community that modern humans have this incredibly low genetic diversity, okay? When you actually study the genetic variation in humans today, it turns out that most of the world's variation is found where? In Africa. Well, people outside of Africa, us non-Africans, have less overall genetic variation than people inside of Africa. Now, here's the thing. It has been observed, okay, that most DNA sequences, Doki Doki, thanks so much for the super sticker, you're awesome. So it's been observed that most DNA sequences outside of Africa have close relatives in Africa. There is also a component of the genetic variation found inside of Africa that have no close relatives outside of Africa, okay? So the direct ancestors of people living today are thought to have emerged first in Africa. This is essentially the theory, the genetic basis for it. Now, in Africa, they accumulate genetic variation, and then parts of that variation eventually went out and colonized the rest of the world. Experts in the field related to human evolution have suggested that this all occurred within, let's say, the last 100,000 years, okay? We'll get into their bottleneck as well in a second, show you why it's not feasible. But this, like I said, is for the most part the genetic basis. I'm simplifying it, of course, for the recent out of Africa origins of modern humans. So there are some issues with this, though. Now, what happened, and I talk about this a lot, I enjoy it, because the evidence for the out of Middle East, the out of Babel model is just so compelling. So when our so-called ancestors left Africa to colonize the rest of the world, there were other forms of humans that appear to have been there for long periods of time. These human variants, okay, like Neanderthals, for example, Denisovans. We know that it's been one big coexistence. So according to the experts, let's say in human evolution, these human forms have been outside of Africa, they say, for about 2 million years. Now, most famous of these human forms, like I said, were the Neanderthals, found in Western Eurasia, and then other extinct human forms found in Eastern Eurasia. Now, we have modern humans that come out of Africa, okay? They enter Europe and Asia, and they appear to have mixed with some of these other human forms. None of this was predicted, of course. Some of the many questions paleo experts are trying to figure out is whether modern humans assimilated with these other human forms or simply replaced them, okay? And yeah, there's always been competing theories, right? The paleo experts, paleoanthropologists, they contest each other. That's where you find the best arguments, the hidden gems. Now, here's the thing. They have competing theories as to how and when modern humans left Africa. These competing theories have resulted in opposing views when it comes to human evolution and our origins. The two most prevalent views you guys are probably familiar with are the recent out of Africa theory and the multi-regional theory. Okay, the out of Africa theory, as I always talk about, proposes what? A population bottleneck that would have been incredibly disastrous. Okay, this population bottleneck, because remember, they didn't predict the genetic data that shows humans have low genetic diversity. They didn't predict this. So they proposed this hypothetical population bottleneck that would have reduced the human population to a small, very small population of about 10,000 for maybe, and you'll find different numbers. They don't really know, it seems, but let's say between 10,000 and 100,000 years, okay? We have an example today with the cheetahs. And evolutionists, whenever I bring up this problem, they always say, well, we have the cheetahs. Look at the cheetahs. Not even pointing out that these cheetahs have gone down to 10,000. People still say 10,000. Last time I checked, they're down to 7,000. This just shows how disastrous this bottleneck would have been. What we're seeing in the cheetahs, we see genetic degeneration. We see birth defects are increasing. The cheetahs are essentially going extinct. Conservationists are worried. They're concerned. Now, apparently, according to this out of Africa theory, we went from what? Okay, we went from Homo erectus, according to their model, to Homo sapiens during a population bottleneck that should have driven us, based on mutation accumulation, based on the nature of inbreeding, these deleterious mutations that have been accumulating for millions and millions of years, as the evolutionists would propose, they come to the forefront, they're manifested, they lead to rapid genetic degeneration. Okay, so you got erectus, goes to Homo sapiens during this disastrous bottleneck, where all these mutations that are deleterious are coming to fixation. This should have essentially driven us to extinction based on how disastrous it would have been. All living humans, they say, originated from this small and very, very highly inbred population, somehow left Africa, exploded into all parts of the world, and seized dominion over the planet. They went from erectus to Homo sapiens during this disastrous population bottleneck. And they say erectus was quite primitive. And then they have the bottleneck, and Homo sapiens are then able to build skyscrapers. That's where we are today, that is. Build skyscrapers, design cell phones, build the space shuttle, So it's just kind of, it's not feasible. It's a storyboard is what it is, okay? It wasn't predicted. It's post hoc, ad hoc rescue devices. Now, another thing I wanted to point out is the YouTube evolutionists here. Okay, they want to look at the data, but assume their model. And okay, I just want to make sure that I've got. Okay, so we got that picture up still. Okay, so let's see. Let's finish this one off, and then we'll go back to that article. Okay, so as you can see here from that comment, okay, as well as Ian Chen's comment, the evolutionist arguments, essentially what Gutsa Gibbon would respond with. Maybe she's got something divergent. We'll see. Here's the thing, okay? Who migrated where? What is this whole, as you can see, late, because that's what they'll say, late, quote unquote, erectus, early erectus, quote unquote, okay? Remember, the evolutionists read these papers and articles in light of what? Their evolutionary-based presuppositions, assumptions, and worldview. They argue as if the conclusions of these papers are not up for interpretation or discussion. We've got the data, guys. We have the empirical evidence. We have the empirical observations. Now the evolutionists think these observations carry equal weight to their evolutionary bias conclusions because they don't question the bigger picture. So they don't look at our interpretation of the data and think that it's valid or even plausible. They don't even consider it. Okay? We know they don't read our literature. Now, what we see is massive coexistence, and I'll tell you why. Erectus migrated in Africa and I'm going to show you in a bit a paper, outside of Africa. The Australopiths are found where? In Africa. These are all the ape types. I also want to point out that there is oftentimes more diversity within the same species than across species, like I said earlier. And many animal types, not just the apes, have a ton of genetic diversity. Look at the chimpanzee. Chimpanzees have a ton of genetic diversity. I think they got like 3 or 4 times the amount humans do. The Australopiths looked like they also had a lot of diversity just based on their morphological and anatomical variation in their bones. Therefore, what they often claim is a different species and therefore give a different species name is actually just the same species, variation within the same species. Any little morphological and anatomical difference, and I know I'm repeating this, but it's so important. The evolutionists have to get it through their heads, is then used to claim a new species when in fact it's the same species, okay? Let's continue. We got Erectus, who not only coexisted with the Australopithecines, but also lived with them in the same places. We see their bones mixed together. We see many indications they coexisted and also coexisted in the same place. Many paleo experts agree with this. It is now assumed, okay, they presume that Erectus left Africa, and I do believe that's true, okay? This is where they not only coexisted with people variants outside of Africa, but also lived with them in the same places. Neanderthals, for example, Denisovans, okay? You've got your types, your variants that are isolated on islands like the hobbits, Naledi, Luzonensis, for example, but they all still shared the planet at the same time, okay? Now, here's the thing. Did the Australopiths migrate outside of Africa to the point where they would not only coexist with these people, but also live in the same places? Probably not, but maybe so. I don't know how much evidence we have on that one, but probably not. Evolutionists use this as a way to say that while early Erectus coexisted with some of the Australopith types, while late, quote unquote, Erectus coexisted with the other human variants. This is ridiculous. This is based on what? Evolutionary presumptions. It's not science. It's inference. It's not supported by the data. What we are looking at is massive coexistence, plain and simple, not this clear and obvious path from Australopith-like to human. Okay, they admit this. There's no clarity. The critics, the YouTube critics, don't want to admit it. Because ape types in Africa, for the most part, including the Australopith types, Erectus in Africa and outside of Africa, with the other human variants. Okay, this isn't difficult. Evolutionists sometimes, I think, play dumb almost. Okay, they think that they think that their inference or their conclusions is just as good as the actual observation and empirical data. It'd be like saying, I don't coexist with, say, somebody over in Asia who I never actually meet, and we share the planet together, but we don't live in the same place together, okay? We don't live in the same place together. But then someone in Asia, maybe they move to where I live, okay, across on the other side of the planet. And maybe they move for going to school, whatever reasons. And now we do not only coexist on the planet, but we live in the near vicinity, in the same place. And that seems to what have happened in the past too. You know, did all these different variants live in the exact same places and actually meet each other? You know, of course not. Your ape types, your Australopithecines, look like they stayed in Africa, while Erectus was in Africa and then left Africa. And that's what the Out of Babel model would propose, that these people groups would have left to all different parts of the planet. The ape types would have stayed in Africa. So it's just a silly argument. And any forthcoming argument is just going to be Lena Powell says they just postulate some dates for mtDNA and why most recent common ancestors. So yeah, we're going to get into that. This is going to be fun. So let's go. I want to show that paper real quick before we go to, before we go to the mitochondrial DNA, because this one's going to be fun. This one's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll share screen. But that's kind of what's bothersome is they think their conclusions, their interpretations of like the data, the paper, that's just as good as the empirical data. So here's a good article. Bernard Wood, famous paleoanthropologist. Did early Homo migrate out of or into Africa? Okay. This is secular, of course. The origin of our own genus remains frustratingly unclear. It must be frustrating to the evolutionists where they got so much contradictory data on their hands. Many of my colleagues are agreed. Although many of my colleagues are agreed regarding the what with respect to Homo, there is no consensus as to the how and the when questions. Well, of course, these colleagues, these paleoanthropologists, they're in the field. That's what they get paid to do. That's what they went to school for. So they're not going to question the bigger picture. They're going to find all the data. And although it's frustrating, there's no more clarity, because if you notice the other paper here, where Australopithecus sediba, unlikely to be the ancestor of Homo, they point out at the discussion, I know exactly where it is because I've read through these so many times, they point out that, look at this, the issue of the origin of Homo is one of the thorniest questions in paleoanthropology, and one that has led to myriad proposals and sometimes speculation. So they've ousted sediba. They've also ousted habilis. But look at this. This paper was in, let's see, guys, May 2019. Funny that, eh? Still no more clarity. Well, this article is 2011. So give it another million years. So they've got questions. So here you read, until relatively recently, most paleoanthropologists assumed Africa was the answer to the where question. But in a little more than a decade, discoveries at 2 sites beyond Africa, and he names one here in Georgia and the other at Liang Bao at the island of Flores, the Homo floresiensis, call this assumption into question. So if you read through this is actually a good one. I don't want to bore the audience to death. But he makes a good point. Let's see if I can find it. Uncertain origins. So what does all this mean for the origin of Homo? The following scenarios are compatible with the meager evidence we have. It would be misleading to claim that any of the scenarios are supported by the meager evidence. I am skeptical about the merits of including habilis in Homo. Let's read that again. I am skeptical about the merits of including habilis in Homo. But if it is included, then Homo must likely evolved in Africa. But where in Africa, when, and from what are all questions presented without reliable answers. If, on the other hand, habilis is excluded from Homo, then the meager evidence we have is consistent with Erectus and thus Homo evolving from habilis grade taxon either within or outside of Africa. Let me see. There's one part I wanted to get to where. So you can see that I find it interesting that did early Homo migrate out of or into Africa? Now, our model would say that from Babel, say the Middle East, they would have migrated into some people groups. Some small people groups would have migrated into. Now, based on everything I said earlier, okay, based on the presuppositions, based on how they think there was only some coexistence, overlapping versus massive coexistence. So we got through that. We showed that this guy's argument in the comment section failed. So here we go. In groundbreaking find, 3 kinds of early humans unearthed living together in South Africa. The different hominid species, possibly including the oldest known Homo erectus, existed in the region's hills and caves. Now, it was Gutsa Gibbon in her video on Godless Engineer's channel that said, and I'm 99% certain, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she said that Erectus and like your Australopithecines, like your Afarensis, they wouldn't have coexisted. Well, the evidence suggests otherwise. Just based on the chimeric nature of them. Now, so here, what we have here is 2 million years ago, 3 different early humans, Australopithecus, Paranthropus, and the earliest known Homo erectus. So they'll say early erectus, right? Because they still need to have their tree somehow, even though it's a bushy mess. Doki doki, I appreciate it. Okay, so how much of the appear to live at the same time in the same place, which is exactly what we would expect. So what they say here. So here we go. How much these different species interacted remains unknown. Okay, a lot of it is unknown. We're just looking at these bones in the present, and we can do our best to look back in history and make interpretations and hopefully build a good story based off the data. But their contemporaneous existence suggests our ancient relatives were quite diverse during a key transitional period of African prehistory that saw the last days of Australopithecus and the dawn of Homo erectus's nearly 2 million year run. So a lot of this, remember, they're not questioning the bigger picture. They still have their basic assumptions. They still have their presuppositions, of course. So the 3 species, one place: Australopithecus africanus, Paranthropus robustus, and Homo erectus. So there's been massive coexistence, even with the Homo genus. And I would say as far back as the Australopithecines. Now remember, your Neanderthals, Naledi, Floresiensis, Luzonensis, Erectus, they all coexisted at the same time too, but where are they found? Okay, where did those people groups migrate to? We see Erectus was in Africa and outside of Africa. Where were the Australopithecines? These are questions evolutionists have to ask themselves before they start thinking that, like they said here, that it was earlier, late Erectus that coexisted with the end of the Australopithecus, some of the Australopithecine types. So right here, it's an excellent paper and it looks quite convincing. So you can read through these. Now, here's the thing. You have to read them. Hopefully, the evolutionists can read them as objectively as possible. But, okay, I want to go to, so we've gone through that paper before. Boom. Let's go to the video, Godless Engineer video. So I'm going to have to reshare and get the audio going. So this is where we're going to have some fun addressing this one. Okay, so I'm going to share screen, get the audio as well. Boom. Let's play their arguments now. Godless Engineer and SpeedOfSound. We'll play it right through, and then we'll address it. We'll see how accurate they are.
And then you look at it. You start looking at it. When you play it back, look at each paper piece by piece. It just all falls apart.
Well, I mean, just for instance, with Standing for Truth's argument about Y chromosomal Adam and mitochondrial Eve, and I've made this point on a video before, which, I mean, he disagrees with me, but he seems to cherry pick the information about both of them to suggest that, you know, these two individuals seem to have confirmed the biblical account. But the biblical account is that two people, you know, mated and gave birth to the entire human race. And the thing is that Y chromosomal Adam and mitochondrial Eve lived thousands of years apart. And so you're cherry picking scientific information in order to make it look like it confirms your point, but it really doesn't.
If you took any gene at all, you could go back and find an ancestor of that gene, but it would always be a different ancestor for any group of people. I mean, It would be mitochondrial, this gene, it would be this gene, the genal Adam and genal Eve, all the way back. I mean, it would just, it's more complicated when you have sexual reproduction, but you can still go back with coalescence and you can find this common ancestor of everything. And they're all going to be different. They're never going to be in the same population, and they don't get that. They think it's absolute proof. They misuse these pedigree studies, where you take samples from father and mother, child, grandparents, or whatever, and you come up with a certain mutation rate. But then there's overall, you can't use that to determine what a mutation rate in a population is going to be. Because it's going to be populations are much more complicated. A lot of those mutations are going to drift out. They're going to be, some will be reversed, especially with mitochondria. You cannot do what they're doing. And they so blatantly double down on that shit. And that's something that it's very technical. It's very mathematical to
Okay. So that's pretty well his argument. So let's get into that. We're going to touch on all of those things he said, including the coalescence rescue device. Okay. This is going to be fun. Now I want to show, I've showed it a few times. I definitely want to show the audience just to follow along, the mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree that Dr. Carter actually got from the 1,000 Genomes Project. But a few points that come to mind before we do that, okay? We'll leave it on share screen for now. So here's the thing. We do, as biblical creationists, we do prefer, he is right on the pedigree-based studies. This is what we're looking at, the empirical method, because we prefer a more straightforward approach to mutation rates that does not assume what? Deep time, and does not assume ape-to-man evolution. And they also, the evolutionists assume humans and chimpanzees split from a hypothetical common ancestor millions of years ago. But I'm going to show you why that's not warranted. And if these critics watch this video and they want to respond, they got to address the issues here, okay? Now, here's the thing. This straightforward approach, this is actually the most empirical way of using the molecular clock. We like, as creationists, we like high confidence science, not low confidence and low quality science like these evolutionists. All we do, let's make it simple so everybody can understand. We simply compare mutation rates in the present, as Speed kind of iterated there. We do this using parents to offspring. This is the pedigree-based method, okay? Now, when comparing mutation rates between parents and children, the mutation rate is actually much faster than the phylogenetic rate. This is why they don't like it, okay? The phylogenetic rate assumes ape-to-man evolution. They don't question the bigger picture. They don't like the empirical rate. It's too fast. It's too fast, not slow enough, okay? As I said, this is all rather simple, the pedigree-based method, okay? Now, this is where we get a very young Eve and a very young Y chromosome ancestor. That Y chromosome ancestor, who the evolutionists termed Y chromosome Adam, according to the biblical model, more accurately, it would be Noah, okay? Now, evolutionists, as I said, like Godless Engineer here, SpeedOfSound, they don't want to use the fast mutation rates because why? It conflicts with their deep time evolutionary story. If it didn't conflict, they'd use it. What if we were guilty of using an assumption-based method like they do and not the measured or straightforward or empirical approach? We can actually look at a family, okay? Take any family, count the differences between the people, and we can get quite an accurate mutation rate, but it is far too fast for the evolution. There's no mutation rate slow enough to account for the date that they need for their Eve and their Adam. They want to look at the differences. This is what they want to do. They want to look at the differences between humans and chimpanzees and say, oh, looks like we've been separated for, X number of years, millions of years, of course. They say 6 million. The number, actually, Dr. Carter has pointed out in the documentary today, Dismantled, that it's changed quite a bit throughout history, especially because of the waiting time problem and the number of DNA differences that need to be fixed within that time period since the split. It's just too much. There's a huge waiting time problem to fix that many mutations. Okay, and the Dr. Sanford's recent paper, published in a secular journal, it's rock solid, been read by thousands of scientists, no serious rebuttal. It would take more time than the universe has had just to fix like a short genetic word, a short genetic sentence. So there's a huge waiting time problem. The math doesn't work out for them. So here's the thing. We count up the number of differences between people today, and we trace those differences back to past ancestors, and you will see that we find a much faster mutation rate than evolutionists would want. All we're doing is using the empirical rate. We can get an Adam, which would be Noah according to our model, and an Eve that fit right in with the biblical time frame. Y chromosome Noah and mitochondrial Eve. Now here's the thing. They'll then claim that Adam and Eve, I've heard Godless Engineers, you hear it in comments all the time, okay, where they say, don't you know, silly creationists? The Adam and Eve, the Y chromosome ancestor and the mitochondrial DNA ancestor, they were part of a population. Well, for one, we just covered, which is why I did it intentionally, the first 30 minutes of the video, we showed why the Out of Africa scenario is not even remotely feasible, not even remotely plausible. Okay? There's no actual direct evidence for this Y chromosome ancestor, mitochondrial DNA ancestor actually being part of a larger population. And it's funny because according to their model, wow, what a lucky mother and what a lucky father. But yet it's just a coincidence that so fits with the biblical model, okay? Now, this coalescence theory that he talks about, okay, before I pull up this mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree, that I want the critics to address. We've presented the data so many times and we're not getting any real response other than storyboards. This coalescence theory that SpeedOfSound brought up, what it does is it proposes that given enough generations, you will eventually trace back to just two common ancestors. When in fact, this theory, okay, coalescence theory actually has many underlying assumptions. One of them being random mating. Okay, that's where you have a population where all the people have a strong likelihood of mating and marrying. For example, Dr. John Sanford talks about this actually. There's some fascinating articles and papers on it. Is this true historically? Obviously not. It falls flat on its face, okay? Humans have existed in tribes that have been separated. There is not random mating. And the best rebuttals from the evolutionists fails miserably. It's commonplace where people within the tribe marry other people from in the tribe. Now, here's the thing I want to point to, and Matt and I have given extensive presentations on all the pedigree-based studies and how even the studies that give dates that are older than the Genesis account, it's nowhere near the hundreds of thousands of years date that the evolutionists need to get the mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome clock too. And the storyboards that they have to invoke, the substitution rates, natural selection, the things that they have to invoke. If it doesn't lead to testable predictions, then it's just pseudoscience. But there's no amount of storytelling. For us, we have bottlenecks. Okay, small inbred, small populations that are inbreeding for a few generations, for example, in these bottlenecks within the flood bottleneck obviously at creation with two people, somewhat of a bottleneck at Babel. This would result in rapid genetic drift and fixation for that time period, which would explain the dates perfectly within a Genesis time frame. So have a look at the screen here. I'm going to pull up, boom, right here. So we're going to pull this up here, and we've shown this before. Right here, it's human mitochondrial DNA. Okay, here's for the critics to answer. This was taken, as I said before, and I've explained this in another video too. But when SpeedOfSound used the coalescence, I thought, okay, he must have either just heard that from Dr. Dan or looked it up on a website, but it fails. It fails. That's why he can't make predictions. Now, this was taken from the 1,000 Genomes Project. Okay, notice here, an obvious pattern. This is exactly what we would expect given the biblical Eve, okay? We are looking at explosive growth from where? A center point. Okay, look at this haplogroup. It's hard to see here. Look at this haplogroup in Europe, okay? Dr. Carter explains this great. If you haven't seen the interview with Dr. Carter, please check it out. The critics haven't been able to sleep since. He is incredibly intelligent, and he's put forth a great model, great argument. So look at this haplogroup in Europe, HVR. Notice how the branches, okay, see here? Notice how the branches actually have different lengths. Do you know what this actually means? These people all have a common ancestor, and yet one group in there, as you can see, have happened to pick up twice as many mutations as their cousins. Isn't that funny? If we can pick up more mutations in the same amount of time, Godless Engineer, answer this one. This means we cannot look between humans and chimpanzees and make an assumption about when they split, which is their assumption. Let's say whatever number they want to put, 6 million years ago, say. What you see here is random mutations occurring in populations over periods of time, but we see a pattern, okay? Explosive growth, all from a center point. That's what we see. This pattern all goes back to a center point. Okay. And there's not a lot of mutations here. There's not a lot of mutations at all to explain from our model. We're not running around trying to explain the data. Why so few mutations? Evolutionists? Explain then. Why does the pattern fit so well with our model? We know mitochondrial DNA mutates fast, leads to testable predictions that they don't ever want to talk about. We're looking at one woman, recent, exactly what the Bible says. Evolution is dead, okay? And evolutionists want to say that this would go back hundreds of thousands of years ago, okay? Because they want to say that the humans and the chimps split millions of years ago, 6 million years ago, even though for many reasons we've covered, chimps and humans are incredibly different. And we've touched on those lines of evidence numerous times. But when you actually do what they think is empirical, even though evolution is dead mathematically, given what I talked about mutation fixation, waiting time problem. Now, the waiting time problem is not an issue for us. We don't explain the majority of DNA differences as a result of mutation. It's amazing It's amazing how easily everything is explained based on the starting point of what? Created heterozygosity. You know, Adam and Eve with differences between them and within them. This would easily explain, this would result in what? The ethno-linguistic differences we see today. They always want to ask, you know, how do you get all these differences, all the so-called racial differences, when in fact Adam and Eve, and Dr. Charles Jackson gave a phenomenal answer the other day on this one. They could have easily produced every variant of human we see today. It would have been within their genetics to produce every shade of skin we see on the planet today. So no waiting time problem for us. Designed organisms, it makes sense scientifically and theologically to design the first kinds with internal genetic diversity, functional diversity. Therefore, we do not need to explain, like they do, all the genetic diversity as a result of what? Mutations over time. That's how they explain all the origin of DNA differences. That's why you're oftentimes arguing with an evolutionist who is using an argument based on a straw man. And then you got to explain to them over and over again our model. They're not up to date on the literature. Okay, just two individuals, my wife and myself, just based on our chromosome sets, we have the ability to allow for vast amounts of genetic diversity, which then, and especially with the biblical kinds too, can be utilized by natural selection and used for adaptive purposes. We do not need evolutionary deep time and diversity originating mechanisms that they look to. We don't have these mathematical problems that they do. The math has been figured out. It's consistent with the biblical creation model. So they just got problem after problem after problem. And I like how Dr. Carter explains so simply. He just points to a human family tree. Take two people, say two people who have the same great grandmother. Okay. Now look at their mitochondria and see how different they are. Let's have a look and see. Let's use measured mutation rates. Let's use not the phylogenetic rate, the phylogeny-based method. Let's see how many mutations they have. On average, Dr. Carter points out that there is about one mutation every other generation, okay? Now, here's the thing. Speed of Sound wants to talk about purifying selection, substitution rates. There are things we have to consider. That's why you can give them generous amounts of purifying selection. Take whatever the observed mutation rate is. Okay. And then account for purifying selection, account for these factors that we need to account for. And you're still only going to get a few hundred generations. You're only going to get the amount of generations that would take us right back to a biblical Eve. And same with the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome mutates fast. The Y chromosome, there's only a few differences that separate us from the sequence of Y chromosome Adam. There's only a few that we need to explain. They can't get the mutation rate to where they need to, okay? Because if there's about one mutation every other generation, you account for purifying selection, all these things that we should be. This tree, like I said, is only a few hundred generations. And I say it fits the model perfectly. But then the evolutionist has to say, well, it's just a coincidence. It's just a coincidence that what we see today is the fact that we have low genetic diversity, our Y chromosomes, every single Y chromosome on this planet goes right back to one Y chromosomal ancestor. And yet there's extremely low variation in the Y chromosome, extremely low variation worldwide. No ancient, no highly divergent Y chromosomes, all consistent with our model. I want to share screen because hopefully I can read this right from the PowerPoint. I want you guys to follow along here. This is from, these are some good points, okay? And let's see how the chat's going. Joe, Gavin, good to see everybody's having fun in the chat. Luca, you're still here. Doki Doki, another super sticker. I appreciate it. Lena Powell says HVR is in Europe. That's right. Yeah, HVR is in Europe. I think that's the most common in Europe. So as you can see, just with that haplogroup, you can see that the pattern fits the biblical model, and the random mutations that are there. It's too sporadic for the evolutionary-based assumptions to have any validity to it. So this is a chapter from Evolution's Achilles Heel. Great book. Great book. So I bought it. I'll see if I can. Yeah, I can see this one. So let's read this. I've read a lot of portions from my books too, but let's get something new. And I like the way they put it here. So this also counters Speed of Sound and good old Godless Engineers. Oh, let me see. I'm sharing screen. Can you guys give me the A-OK that you can see it? Because maybe. So it should be a picture of the page. Just one sec. Let me go make sure. Get this. Luca says 9 a.m. up here. Okay, so we can go for another 10 hours then, Luca. Nice and early for you. 3 a.m. here. Shadow Dancer says, SFT, do you have Dr. Jensen's Y chromosome chart like the mtDNA? I do somewhere. Good question. Yeah. I'm going to have to, because I've gone over that mitochondrial DNA chart many times. We haven't gotten any rebuttal from the critics, and I do want to plan the same thing, make it interactive like this with the Y chromosome. So, yeah, good question. Okay, guys, so make sure that it's on the screen. I'm going to start going. So I'm in the PowerPoint, and oh, that's why my phone's frozen. I was wondering why it wasn't showing up. Okay. I like to watch from the phone too, make sure everything's going good. So, and anyone who just got here, definitely, the last couple of weeks have been crazy. Go check out the Dr. Jackson interview, Dr. Carter, Dr. Stadler. Last night was a great debate between Dr. Dino and Derek Barnes. We've had a lot of fun and a lot more fun to come. Okay, so let's see here. When one considers the female-specific and male-specific sections of DNA, this is the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA, of course. Mitochondrial DNA we inherit from our mothers, Y chromosome from our fathers. And these for the most part are the non-recombining DNA, okay? They're the uniparentally inherited DNA. That's why this is what we want to focus on. When it comes to the nuclear DNA, it can be a little bit more messy. We're invoking created heterozygosity, which does lead to testable predictions, of course. But these uniparentally inherited DNAs, we can agree with the evolutionists that they are the result of mutation. The differences, that is, are the result of mutations over time. Therefore, it's a head-to-head model, head-to-head predictions, retrodictions, and let's see what model is true. Independent origins or universal common ancestry. So, and this is what they want to avoid. This is what they want to avoid. Okay, so let's see. We can see even more confirmation of Adam and Eve. According to a lot of theory and a lot of experimental evidence, mitochondria, those little subcellular power plants that convert sugar to energy, are only passed on through the female line, just as I said. Since mitochondria also have their own little genome of approximately 16,569 letters, and since this little genome is also subject to mutation over time, we can use it to build a family tree of worldwide female ancestry. This led to the announcement of an African mitochondrial Eve in the evolutionary literature. Let's go to the next page. Back in 1987, if there were any other females alive millions of years ago, only one managed to pass her genome to all people living today. So this is why I said earlier that according to the evolutionists, they must look at this woman as one lucky mother. But you can see how there was every reason for the evolutionists to expect multiple of these lines, some of them being even shared with the chimpanzees if there are recent common ancestors. Dr. Carter talks about how all the mitochondrial DNA, for example, he works with mitochondrial DNA. He's got tons of data on his computer and they all fit perfectly. But when you throw in the chimpanzee mitochondrial DNA, it's all a mess. None of it matches. And that's the issue. That's the issue is the differences are just too great. Don't get me started on the Y chromosome. So, yeah, according to the evolutionists, lucky mother, and coalescence fails, as I said earlier. Okay, so let's see. The data mitochondrial Eve is assumed to be in the hundreds of thousands of years before present, but only if one assumes a certain slow mutation rate. Remember that slow mutation rate I was talking about? And common ancestry with chimps. That's right. Using real-world mutation rates gives an age for Eve about 6,000 years ago. A more recent study demonstrated that mutations in the mitochondrial control region, these account for approximately 2/3 of all mitochondrial mutations, occur at a rate of 1 every other generation. There you go. Since Eve's mitochondrial sequence has been reconstructed and published in the evolutionary literature, and since most mitochondrial lines are less than 30 mutations removed, remember I said just a few mutations are we removed from the Eve sequence. Okay, there's only the max mutation separating any two people on the planet. The max is about 100. I think they talk about it here. Let's see. Less than 30 mutations removed from the Eve consensus sequence, and since the most divergent, right? So the most divergent, the most different are only 100 mutations removed. Easily explained. If you go back to that mitochondrial DNA chart I showed you, just a few mutations. How did the evolutionists account for it? Storyboards, that's how. Let's continue. The diversity of mitochondrial DNA within the modern human population can easily fit into a 6,000 year / 200 generation time frame. The African Eve hypothesis and the evolutionary assumptions behind it have been dealt with previously. So the details will not be reproduced here. Well, I did go over earlier the coalescence and one of the major assumptions behind it, which is random mating. So we know the sequence of more than 99% of the mitochondrial genome of the original human family. We know mitochondrial Eve sequence, and I've went over this before. Dr. Carter's got a paper on it, actually. So there is no evidence for any other. Why do people believe Eve was just one of the many females living in a large population a very long time ago? Because this is part of a model of evolutionary history. It is not grounded in reality, but it gives them a convenient excuse for discounting, there's a little mark there, I can't read it, discounting the biblical prediction that there should be but one female lineage in the world. Like the mitochondrial genome, the male Y chromosome gives a way to, I'm going to pull this up in my actual book because it looks like there's a glare there. So let's see, 68, and I want you guys to hear the rest of it. So let's see where I was. Okay, so I'll read it right from the book. Like the mitochondrial genome, the male Y chromosome gives us a way to build a family tree of all the men in the world. Y chromosome atoms supposedly existed a very long time ago as well. Remember, as they were saying in the video, good old Godless Engineer and SpeedOfSound. But at a different time than mitochondrial Eve. Remember, that's what Godless Engineer said? See, these guys, just textbook answers or arguments against creationists. Pelagia, and I think it's Tony Reed, have a video out on mitochondrial DNA. And it's like, we've gone over it so much, but I feel like we just need to have another evolutionist bites the dust night on them because there's so many of these evolutionists putting forth these false, erroneous arguments. Okay, so let's go. However, as above, these conclusions are based on models that assume a lot about human history, population size and mutation rates. With the publication of the revised chimp Y chromosome and the discovery that it is only 70% identical to the human Y chromosome, and they say in brackets, even this number is generous since half of the chimp is missing. So what's funny is it's actually about, when you consider overall architecture, gene content, size differences, everything, consider it all, it's less than 35% dissimilar. They've been trying to answer that question from me for months. But apparently we're finally going to get an answer. Okay, so let's see. Evolutionists are forced to conclude that the Y chromosome has mutated extremely rapidly in human history. And that's why I always ask, if that's the case, show me some highly divergent and highly mutated Y chromosomes on the planet. They can't. Because guess what? Every single human Y chromosome on the planet is incredibly similar, nearly identical. Speaks to the youth of the Y chromosome, especially if it's mutating fast. Imagine it was mutating for hundreds of thousands of years, like they say. Going back to whenever their bottleneck was, that would have reduced the population to one Y chromosomal ancestor and one Y chromosome line. Could you imagine? And yet it's all so similar. And there's only a few mutations that separate us from the Adam consensus. So I'll continue. Yet the current, let's go to the next. Oh, I think I got the slide here. maybe I can continue reading right from the slide. Boom. Okay, so yet the current human Y chromosomes found in the world are all very similar to one another. There you go, just as I said. The only way to maintain similarity under a high mutation load is to have a very recent common ancestor. Viva Adam. Hey, critics, answer this one. Quit dodging. Team dodgeball. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. The 5 Ds of dodge. The only way to maintain similarity under a high mutation load is to have a very recent common ancestor. And according to our model, that common ancestor would be Y chromosome Noah. Another measure we can use to test the veracity of Adam and Eve is in linkage data. During sexual reproduction, the cells in both parents go through meiosis, where the chromosomes they inherited from their parents are mixed together. Thus, when parents pass on their genes, they're actually passing on a scrambled versions of their grandparents' chromosomes. Here's a good argument that I asked this one to Godless Engineer in our last video. This scrambling, called crossing over, causes DNA to be inherited in large blocks. There are sections of the genome that have not crossed over in all of human history. Isn't that funny? What does that indicate? Well, they say it here, indicating a youthful genome. When 2 variants are inherited together, because they are close together on the same DNA strand, they are said to be linked. And I have a video called Linkage Disequilibrium where I debunk Dr. Dan, the pseudoscience man. Definitely check that out if you want an in-depth explanation of this, as well as some questions that indicate a youthful genome that they dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. And then they have an argument on linkage disequilibrium that I tore apart in that video. So definitely check that out. Let's continue. Linkage has been studied in detail, and we have learned some very interesting things from it. First, between 2 and 4 common blocks explain most of the blocks in all human populations. In other words, there are only a few original chromosomes, and pieces of those chromosomes are still intact. There are only 10,000 or so blocks in the genome, which is easily explained if the human population is only about 200 generations old. Isn't that funny how the linkage block data, the genetic diversity data, the Y chromosomal line, the mitochondrial DNA line, including the 3 major haplogroups that we can see on the mitochondrial DNA tree, LMN, the fact that the pattern, the center followed by explosive growth. Isn't that funny? There's not a lot of mutations in the mitochondrial DNA compartment or the Y chromosomal compartment. Isn't it funny how it's just all so consistent with biblical creation? All of these things that for the most part had to be true if the Bible's account of human origins were true. Had to be true. And yet all of these revision after revision after revision with the evolutionists, no more clarity. Guess what? With every single revision, they're getting closer to the biblical model. Give them another 1,000,000 years and they will be at the biblical model. They will be forced to admit that the out of Africa theory and human evolution is a fraud. And the truth is biblical creation, the out of Babel event. So where were we? There are only 10,000 or so blocks in the genome, which is easily explained if the human population is only about 200 generations old. And there are 1 to 2 crossing over events per long chromosome arm per generation. Besides the molecular clock assumption behind most evolutionary studies, the majority also assumes that recombination, remember this argument from Evo Grad and Swami Das and Dan, we've dealt with this and they're falling all over themselves for an answer. So the majority also assume that recombination is the same through time and across all geography. This is not necessarily so, however, as we know that crossing over is affected by genetic factors. Dr. Carter talked about this in our interview. We asked him this exact question. In our interviews, we like to ask, the critics questions, and we like to show them how easily answered they are by not only us, but the PhD creationists that we love to learn from and that are such a blessing to us. So when they say that, there's no answer to this question, you've got this unsolvable question, that's because they're not up to date on the creationist literature. They haven't read the technical articles, the technical papers. They're not up to date on the articles. They don't know. They don't know the model. They're arguing against a straw man. So in brackets, the PRDM9 gene, which we talked about in great detail, and that variations exist within these factors that affect the rate of crossing over in different individuals. This is a challenge to many prior evolutionary studies, including much of what has been claimed about the evidence for our African origins. So there's some good stuff there. So isn't it funny how in just 2 or 3 minutes, how many wrong things these evolutionists can say? You can see Godless Engineer and SpeedOfSound there said more wrong things in one sentence than words that there were in that sentence. So, yeah, like I said, this is going to be a shorter one. Well, an hour and a half is not too short, but shorter for my streams. We wanted to address some comments. We wanted to address Godless Engineer and good old SpeedOfSound there. So as you can tell, the data doesn't fit. The arguments they're using are failing. The rescue devices they resort to don't result in any real testable predictions, any retrodictions. And as you can see from the mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree there's only a few mutations. Everything's consistent with our model. So let's get to the chat before we shut it down. Anybody just got here? We've been going for an hour and a half. We touched on some YouTube comment warriors, debunked those comments, and we spent some good time on Godless Engineer and SpeedOfSound's video. So George Bond, super chat. 400,000 female eggs with approximately 4 billion females today. Just imagine. Yeah, Dr. Charles Jackson went over the mosaic Eve and the created heterozygosity hypothesis the other day. Great interview. We love Dr. Jackson. He was a blessing. Great interview. So still good to see everybody here. Raw Matt, Shadow Dancer, Stupid Horror Energies here. Good to see ya. Thanks for joining the party. A little bit late though, unfortunately. And typically I can go for 3 hours, but that was a lot. I'm long-winded now. So guys, good to see. Lucas says, I'll see the debate with Hovind next. Yeah, go have a look, Luke. A really good debate, respectful, cordial. We kept it evenly timed. Great Q&A. Q&A was like a second debate. We had, yeah, definitely check that out. A lot of fun. Check out the Jackson interview if you haven't. Stupid or Energy says, have a good night. You have a good night as well. She says, yeah, sorry. No need to be sorry. We'll go live again tomorrow night for you. So these evolutionists, their comments and videos, we got job security for life. We could do this every single night for the next million years. Okay, guys. Brother Gavin says 20 watching. Yeah, even at 3:30 in the morning. I'm glad people are having fun. Antonio Z. Good to see you, brother. Thanks for being a patron. I should say that. Yeah, I got a Patreon now. People that want to support the channel. We love you guys. You guys are the life and blood of this channel. All the amazing support we've gotten over the last little while is exactly the reason why we've been able to put on all these interviews, debates, discussions, these nightly streams that oftentimes require a lot of prep and studying. So God bless you guys. God bless you guys. SWE says, put on some 80s music. I seem to always get a copyright claim when I do that. I've been doing some custom music, SWE. But next time I will, just for you. Just for you. So, Brother Nicholas, good to see you. And boom, we're going on an hour and a half. Hope you guys had some fun. I'll probably clip out the Godless Engineer part. Praise. Praise. All right, guys. We are going to call it a night. Good to see you. And everybody, God bless. Standing for Truth is out.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button.